Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that's top of mind for many, especially as the weather warms up, the price of gasoline.
Right. It always seems to creep up in the summer.
Exactly. We're focusing on what's happened at the pump in Tinley Park and the wider Chicago area over the last few summers, specifically 2022 through 2024.
Now, while getting, super specific data just for Tinley Park alone is tough, we've pulled together a pretty detailed picture for the greater Chicago metropolitan region. And given Tinley Park's location, these broader trends should give you a really good sense of the local situation.
Right, so consider the Chicago metro area as our lens for this deep dive. Our goal today is to really try and understand the key trends and the different factors pushing and pulling those gas prices.
Yeah, what's actually behind those numbers you see on the sign?
We want to provide you with a clearer understanding of why those numbers fluctuate so much when you fill up. We'll be looking closely at three distinct summers, 2022, which saw those record highs.
Unforgettable highs.
Then 2023, which offered some relief, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And 2024, which was marked by a pretty significant local disruption.
A very specific event that summer.
Okay, let's dive in.
Yeah.
Looking back at summer 2022, what was going on with those unprecedented prices?
Well, summer 2022 was really something else for gasoline prices here in Chicago. We saw levels we just hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
According to the Energy Information Administration, the average price for regular unleaded in the Chicago region hit 5.693 cents per gallon. That was in June of 2022.
569. Wow. And that wasn't just like one agency reporting that, right? The Bureau of Labor Statistics had similar figures.
That's right. The BLS data for the Chicago, Naperville, Elgin area, it showed an average of 5.818 cents in June.
Even higher.
Yeah, slightly. And their data also showed prices staying above $5 for July and August, too. So multiple sources definitely painting the same picture.
Okay. And what about the daily peaks? I remember hearing some really high numbers.
Oh, absolutely. If you zoom in on the daily peaks, the numbers are even more striking. The Chicago metro area, it reached 5.916 cents on Juneteenth.
Almost $6.
Almost. And the city of Chicago itself actually peaked a bit higher at a staggering 6.068 cents on June 13th.
6068. Just to put that in perspective, what was the national average around then?
Good question. The U.S. national average in June 2022 was around 5.032 jucks per gallon.
So we're talking about a substantial Chicago premium here.
A huge one, especially on those peak days. Chicago drivers were paying, over $1 more per gallon compared to the national peak price.
Over $1 more. What was the main thing driving that dramatic spike?
The primary catalyst was really a dramatic increase in global crude oil prices.
Right.
And this was largely a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That event just created significant instability and, uncertainty in the global energy markets. It really impacted supply expectations.
Right. The global context makes sense. And I remember, too, everyone was starting to travel again after the pandemic lockdowns. Did that factor in?
Absolutely. That played a big role. We had this surge in demand as people were, eager to get back out there, hit the road. And that happened right as those global oil supplies were getting tighter. Plus, you had U.S. refinery capacity still kind of catching up, still recovering from pandemic-related slowdowns.
So it was like a perfect storm. High crude costs, supply issues, and everyone wanting to drive.
Pretty much. All hitting at the same time.
You have to think about the impact on household budgets. I mean, paying upwards of $6 a gallon, that must really change how people think about driving, about spending.
Oh, for sure. Those prices put a significant strain on disposable income. People had to make some tough choices,
Yeah.
And it's very likely that prices that high push some people to seriously look at more fuel-efficient cars, or maybe even, public transport or other options.
It's interesting how a sharp shock like that can maybe shift longer-term behavior.
Definitely. What's fascinating is seeing how those extreme price points can influence consumer decisions down the road.
So, okay, that was the pain of 22. Did we get some relief at the pump in 2023?
Yes, thankfully. Summer 2023 brought a noticeable decrease. We weren't seeing those extreme $5, $6 levels.
All right.
If you look at the EIA data, the Chicago average in June 2023 was 4.181 cents. It actually dipped a bit in July to 4.024 cents before ticking back up slightly to 4.305 in August.
Okay, so still over $4, but much better than 22. And the BLS data showed the same kind of trend.
Mirrored it pretty closely, yeah. For the Chicago, Naperville, Elgin area, the BLS July average was $4.1964.
So comparing that to July 22, That's a big drop.
A huge drop. That July 22 BLS number was 5.364 cents, remember? So we're talking about 1.192 cents less per gallon in July 23, a significant difference.
What were the main reasons for that drop? Things calming down globally.
Primarily, yes. The biggest factor was a decline in global crude oil prices. Brent crude, which is a key international benchmark, it averaged around $74.80 a barrel in June 23.
Much lower than 22 levels.
Much lower. And on top of that, U.S. gasoline inventories had increased, which helped provide more supply stability.
Okay, so things were better. But you mentioned earlier that Chicago Premium, did that still exist even when prices came down?
It did. That's a really important point. Even with those lower global prices, Chicago was still paying more than the national average.
Right. How much more?
Well, if we take that July 2023 Chicago BLS average, the 4.172 cents, and compare it to the U.S. national average for that month, which was 3.842 cents, we still see about a 33-cent difference per gallon.
33 cents higher. So that suggests there's something else going on here locally.
Exactly. It suggests there are more persistent, sort of embedded regional cost factors that keep Chicago prices higher. It really makes you ask, what are those built-in costs?
Interesting. So even when the big global pressures ease off, there's still this local baseline keeping prices up. You also mentioned prices ticked up a bit in Chicago in August of 23. Why was that?
Yeah, even with the overall cooling trend from 22, we did see that August increase here. It was likely a combination of things.
Okay.
Probably some increased demand towards the end of the summer driving season, plus some reductions in national refinery output, maybe due to planned maintenance.
Seasonal maintenance.
Yeah, it just highlights that ongoing sort of dance between supply and demand in the market, even when the bigger picture looks calm.
Okay, so we've covered the extremes of 22 and the relative calm of 23. Let's turn to summer 2024 now. You said that was shaped by a different kind of event, a local one.
Yes, summer 2024 was really defined, for our region anyway, by a significant local event, the temporary shutdown of the ExxonMobil refinery down in Joliet.
The Joliet refinery.
Right. And that event really, it underscored how vulnerable the Chicago region can be to disruptions in its energy infrastructure.
And we saw that show up in the prices pretty quickly, didn't we?
We did. The EIA data shows the Chicago averaged just under $4 in June. Then it jumped up to 4.0888 in July before easing off a bit in August.
And the BLS data.
Similar story. For Chicago Naperville Elgin, BLS showed that July peak clearly at 4.226 cents.
422. What exactly caused that shutdown and the July spike?
Well, the cause was actually a tornado back in July 2024. Now, it didn't directly hit the refinery itself, but it knocked out the power supply.
Power loss.
Exactly. And that forced the refinery to temporarily stop operations. The impact on gasoline prices was, well, almost immediate. Around July 24th, the average price in Chicago shot up to $4.34 a gallon.
Wow. How much of an increase was that in a short time?
That was about a 27-cent jump in just 1 week.
27 cents in a week. That's fast.
Yeah.
And I imagine that wasn't just felt in Chicago. It must have had ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. Neighboring states like Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, they also rely on the Joliet refinery for some of their gasoline supply.
So they saw prices go up too.
They did. And comparing those July 2024 averages to previous summers really shows you the impact of this local disruption. We weren't near the crazy highs of 2022, obviously.
Right.
But prices were definitely higher than they were in July 2023. It clearly indicates that this local factor, the refinery outage, was the dominant thing influencing prices here at that time.
So even if global oil prices were relatively stable that summer,
Which they were.
that local refinery issue basically overrode everything else for Chicago prices.
Precisely. Global oil prices in summer 24 were, relatively stable. Brent crude was mostly trading between $70 and $90 a barrel.
Okay.
And nationally, the expectation was actually for gasoline prices maybe to ease a bit, partly because overall U.S. refinery capacity had increased slightly.
But not here.
But not here. The Joliet outage completely flipped that script for our local picture. It's a stark demonstration of how a single localized infrastructure problem can hit regional gas prices harder and faster than, say, broader global trends.
Yeah, it really makes you think about our reliance on these key infrastructure points. I seem to remember reading about an analyst suggesting something during that shutdown, a potential way to ease the pressure.
Yes. You're probably thinking of analyst Andy Lee Powell. He suggested that temporarily relaxing some of the gasoline quality specifications, the summer blend rules,
Right.
could potentially help increase the available supply quickly and maybe take some steam out of the price surge.
Did that happen? Did the EPA respond?
Well, there wasn't any immediate action taken by the EPA in response to that suggestion at the time, which, it raises interesting questions about how flexible regulations can or should be during unexpected supply crises like that.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and really delve into this recurring theme we've touched on, the Chicago premium. Why is it that gas in Chicagoland just consistently seems to cost more than other parts of Illinois and certainly more than the national average?
Yeah, it's a really persistent pattern, a well-established trend, unfortunately, for drivers here.
So what's behind it?
Well, we see it consistently. Just as an example, if you look at a recent snapshot, say, the Illinois state average was 3.400 tenths per gallon. The Chicago metro average on that same day was already higher, 3.535 cents. And then the city of Chicago, even higher, 3.775 cents.
Wow, quite a difference just within the state. And it's not just state gas taxes causing that, right? Because those are the same everywhere in Illinois.
Exactly. The state motor fuel tax is applied uniformly. So that difference, especially between the metro area and the city proper, isn't primarily driven by state taxes.
So what else is adding to the cost for Chicago drivers beyond the state tax?
Well, there are several local factors that likely play a pretty significant role. You could have additional taxes levied at the Cook County level or even by the city of Chicago itself.
Right, local taxes.
Then there's just the cost of doing business. Operating a gas station in a dense urban area like Chicago is generally more expensive. Think about land costs, real estate, insurance, labor, all that overhead.
Sure, higher operating costs make sense.
And even the logistics, Getting fuel distributed efficiently within a congested metropolitan area, that can add complexity and cost too.
Okay, so city costs and maybe some local taxes. And when we look back at the last few summers and compare Chicago to the national average, that premium really stands out, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's very evident. If we just revisit those July BLS averages we talked about, July 2024, Chicago was nearly 48 cents per gallon higher than the U.S. average.
48 cents.
July 2023, it was still about 33 cents higher.
Mm-hmm.
And even during that crazy peak in July 2022, the Chicago premium over the national average was almost 60 cents per gallon.
60 cents. So these are pretty substantial and, importantly, consistent differences year after year.
Very consistent. What's really interesting, or maybe frustrating, depending on your perspective, is just the persistence of that gap.
So it seems like it's more than just the local city costs and taxes then.
Yeah.
Are there bigger geographical or logistical reasons why the whole Midwest region, including Chicago, might face higher prices?
Yes, exactly. There are underlying factors related to our geography. The Midwest is, relatively speaking, kind of isolated from the major crude oil production centers, like down on the Gulf Coast, and also from the really large coastal refineries that have easier access to, international crude oil coming in on tankers.
So distance equals cost.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. That distance translates into higher transportation costs. Costs to get crude oil to the Midwest refineries in the first place, and then also cost to ship refined gasoline into the region if our local supply gets tight.
Like during the Joliet outage.
Precisely. The fact that gasoline literally had to be shipped up from the Gulf Coast to Chicago during the Joliet shutdown, that perfectly illustrates these longer supply lines and the extra transportation expenses that come with them.
Okay, this is making a lot more sense. We've covered a lot of ground here: global events, local disruptions, ongoing costs. Let's try to maybe summarize the key drivers that really influence gas prices here in Tinley Park and the broader Chicago area.
Yeah, absolutely. We can kind of group them into a few main categories. First, you've absolutely got the global and national market forces.
Right. Crude oil.
Crude oil price is the single biggest piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pushed around by big international events. We saw the huge impact of the war in Ukraine in 22, decisions by OPEC plus countries about production levels, geopolitical tensions, even the general health of the U.S. economy and inflation rates. It all feeds in.
Okay, so global and national markets. What's next?
Then you have the local and regional refinery operations. This is crucial for our area. It includes the total refining capacity we have in the U.S. and especially in the Midwest.
How much they're actually running. Utilization rates.
Exactly, utilization rates. And as 2024 showed so clearly, the massive impact of any unexpected shutdowns like the one in Joliet.
Yeah.
But even things like planned routine maintenance at refineries can tighten supply temporarily. And then there are the limitations of the Midwest's pipeline network. how fuel gets moved around. That all plays a role.
Got it. Refinery operations. What else?
Then, specifically for us, we can't ignore Illinois state gasoline taxes and policies.
Ah, yes, the state tax.
Those scheduled increases in the motor fuel tax, the MFT, they happened each July from 2022 through 2024.
Right, they kept ticking up.
They did. It went from 0.3922s per gallon up incrementally to 0.47 CISO per gallon by July 2024. And those are just direct pass-throughs, right? They directly increase the price you pay at the pump. Those cents add up.
Okay, taxes and the last piece.
The last category is really seasonal demand and consumer behavior. The classic summer driving season definitely increases demand for gasoline.
Sure, more people on the road.
And then there's the regulatory piece, the requirement for that more expensive summer blend gasoline during warmer months. It's formulated differently to help reduce smog.
Right, the summer blend costs more to make.
It does. So these seasonal factors, both demand and the fuel requirements, they can really amplify price changes, especially if the underlying market conditions are already tight.
So it's really this complex mix, isn't it? Global stuff, national markets, what's happening at nearby refineries, state taxes, even the time of year.
Precisely. It's that complex interplay between all those forces, global, national, regional, state, local, seasonal, that ultimately sets the price you see on the gas station sign in Tinley Park or anywhere in Chicagoland.
And it explains both why prices can jump around so much, the volatility, and also why we seem to have that consistent price premium compared to other places.
That's the picture, yes. It's a combination that leads to both volatility and that baseline premium.
So I guess the key takeaway here is that filling up your tank in the Chicago area, well, it's subject to a really intricate web of forces. It makes prices somewhat unpredictable and, generally speaking, higher than many other places.
Yeah. And it shows we're clearly sensitive not just to the big international headlines, but also very much to these localized infrastructure issues.
That's exactly right, which, it really prompts a final thought to leave people with. Given this vulnerability we've seen, especially to regional supply shocks like that Joliet refinery outage, what sort of measures could even be considered to maybe enhance energy resilience here in the Midwest? Could it help lessen the blow of future price spikes?
That's a great question to ponder. Could we think about things like diversifying our fuel supply sources more, maybe more investment in critical pipeline or storage infrastructure, or, as we touched on earlier, perhaps developing more adaptable regulatory responses for handling these kinds of unexpected crises?
Lots to think about there. Definitely something worth pondering as we all keep an eye on those prices at the pump.